A responsibility is not something you carry on your shoulders. It is not a weight to drag along the corridors of life. Responsibility is not guilt. It is not blame. And yet, most people experience it as all of these things, because the mind has confused duty with identity, because the mind has measured worth with accomplishment. When a child is growing up, every should is slowly planted in the mind. You should behave. You should perform. You should not make mistakes. And all of this slowly shapes a picture of responsibility. But this is responsibility by fear, responsibility by pressure, responsibility by obligation. And when the mind experiences responsibility in this way, it is always heavy, always stressful, always tiring. The body tightens, the breath shortens, the heart carries an unnecessary load, and yet the essence of responsibility has nothing to do with this suffering. Responsibility is simply the ability to respond, moment to moment. It is not about controlling the world. It is not about managing others. It is not about proving your worth to anyone. It is simply about being awake enough to meet life as it is, to respond intelligently to what is happening now. Most of the time, people carry responsibility as if it were a bucket of sand, and in doing so, they forget that they are not the bucket. They are not the weight. They are the awareness that can carry without being burdened. This is the shift that the mind rarely understands. Now, notice this carefully. Responsibility without burden does not mean irresponsibility. It does not mean negligence. It does not mean avoiding consequences. It simply means moving with clarity, with precision, with alignment, and without fear. The moment fear enters, responsibility turns heavy, becomes a chain, becomes a suffering. But when awareness enters, responsibility becomes freedom. The world often praises those who carry burdens well, who work tirelessly, who sacrifice, who seem to suffer in the name of duty. But this is misunderstanding. It is suffering glorified. Responsibility is not a test of endurance. It is a test of awareness. And awareness is always effortless. Even in action, it moves silently, without tension, without struggle. Take a moment to observe yourself, right now, your own sense of responsibility, and notice if it is mixed with fear, with pressure, with comparison, with need to perform, or does it exist as a quiet capacity, as a gentle readiness, as an effortless presence, fully awake, fully alive? Most people think responsibility belongs only to the adults, to those who have titles, to those who have authority. But the truth is, responsibility is available to every human being, right now, in this moment, not as a burden, but as a capacity, as an opening, as a possibility to meet life clearly, without distortion, without judgment. When you carry responsibility consciously, it is like a river flowing naturally, following its course, effortless, pure, unobstructed. When you carry it unconsciously, it is like a river blocked with debris, laboring, suffocating, burdened, always threatening to overflow. The difference is subtle, yet it defines your entire experience of life. And this subtlety cannot be taught. It can only be experienced. It can only be realized when you slow down, when you observe carefully, when you are willing to see responsibility, not as a duty, not as a burden, but as a natural quality of awareness, unfolding effortlessly. Most people are trained to believe that responsibility is heavy, and therefore they approach life defensively. They approach relationships cautiously, decisions fearfully, opportunities hesitantly. All of this is the result of misunderstanding. Awareness is the key. Awareness transforms responsibility from a weight to a capacity. Awareness allows responsibility to breathe, to exist lightly, to exist joyfully. Notice this: when awareness is present, responsibility does not feel like a task. It does not feel like a chore. It does not weigh upon the body or the mind. It simply exists as a capacity to respond. And when you act from this space, you realize that life itself is not a burden. Every action is effortless, every choice clear, every responsibility a doorway, not a chain. So ask yourself, how much of your responsibility today is real, and how much of it is imagined, fabricated by fear, by comparison, by social conditioning? Can you allow yourself to meet your duties, your obligations, your roles, without carrying the unnecessary weight of judgment, anxiety, and expectation? Responsibility without burden is not a philosophy. It is not a teaching to memorize. It is a living experience. In the first part, we looked at responsibility not as blame, not as guilt, but as the simple ability to respond. Now we must go a little deeper, because even after understanding this intellectually, the burden does not disappear. The mind understands, but the body still carries tension, the emotions still react, the weight still feels real. Why is this so? Because the burden of responsibility is rarely about action, it is about identity. The moment you say, "I am responsible," unconsciously you also say, "If something goes wrong, it is me." And the ego does not like uncertainty. It does not like the possibility of failure. It does not like the loss of image. So it tightens, prepares for impact, braces itself against life. And this bracing, this constant tightening, is what you experience as burden. But see this clearly: life is not asking you to control outcomes. Life is only asking you to participate consciously. There is a vast difference between control and participation. Control is heavy, participation is light. Control demands guarantees. Participation offers involvement. When you try to control every consequence, every reaction, every opinion of others, responsibility becomes unbearable, because you are attempting something impossible. You are attempting to manage a universe that does not belong to you. Responsibility is not about controlling life. It is about responding to life, and response is always in the present moment. It is not about tomorrow's failure, not about yesterday's mistake. It is about what is needed now. Notice how much of your stress comes not from action itself, but from anticipation, from imagining what might go wrong, from rehearsing worst-case scenarios, from replaying past errors. The mind creates layers of psychological weight, and then says, "I am responsible for all of this." But you are not responsible for imagination. You are responsible only for awareness. This is the shift, subtle yet transformative. When you move from psychological responsibility to existential responsibility, the burden dissolves. Psychological responsibility says, "I must ensure everything works." Existential responsibility says, whatever comes, I will respond consciously. The first creates anxiety, the second creates strength. Look at nature for a moment. A tree does not feel burdened by the responsibility of growing. A river does not feel pressured by the responsibility of flowing. The sun does not feel stressed about rising. They simply express their nature, effortless, complete, total. Then why has the human being made responsibility so heavy? Because the human being has added identity to action. Because action is no longer just action. It is self-definition, self-worth, self-image. If the action succeeds, the ego expands. If the action fails, the ego contracts. And in both expansion and contraction, there is instability, there is tension. Responsibility without burden requires something radical. It requires you to act fully, but not derive identity from the action. It requires you to be involved completely, but not entangled psychologically. This is not detachment in the sense of indifference. It is deeper involvement without inner friction. Imagine doing everything you must do with total intensity, total clarity, but without carrying it home in your mind, without replaying it endlessly, without measuring yourself against it. How light would you feel? The burden you carry is not from responsibility. It is from memory and imagination wrapped around responsibility. See this clearly, and something shifts within you. The weight you thought was real begins to soften. The shoulders relax. The breath deepens. Responsibility then becomes a choice, not a compulsion, a conscious participation, not a forced obligation. And when responsibility is chosen, it empowers you. When it is imposed psychologically, it weakens you. This is why two people can carry the same role, the same duties, the same external pressure, and yet one feels crushed while the other feels alive. The difference is not in circumstance, it is in their relationship to responsibility. One is trying to control life, the other is simply responding to life. There is a profound freedom in knowing that you are not here to guarantee outcomes. You are here to give your best response in this moment. Nothing more, nothing less. When you understand this deeply, you stop fearing responsibility. You stop avoiding it. You stop resenting it. Instead, you begin to embrace it because it is no longer heavy. It is an expression of your aliveness. Take a moment now and notice one responsibility in your life that feels heavy. Perhaps it is family, work, expectations, finances, relationships. Notice the tension around it. Notice the narrative attached to it. Now gently separate the action from the story. The action may remain, but the story, the fear, the imagined consequences, the identity attached can dissolve. What remains then? Only the ability to respond, clear, grounded, present. This is responsibility without burden, not because the world has become lighter, but because you have stopped carrying unnecessary weight within. And as we continue, we will explore how this shift transforms not only your actions, but your relationships, your decisions, and your very sense of self. Until now, we have explored responsibility as an inner experience. the shift from burden to capacity, the difference between control and response. But responsibility does not exist in isolation. It expresses itself most visibly in relationships, in work, in family, in society, in the countless interactions that shape your life. And this is where the misunderstanding becomes deeper, because relationships amplify identity. They stir emotion, they awaken expectation, they trigger memory, and suddenly responsibility feels personal. When something happens in a relationship, the mind immediately reacts. It says, "It is my fault," or "it is their fault." Blame begins to circulate. Guilt begins to grow. Defensiveness rises. And what could have been a simple response becomes a psychological battle. But responsibility without burden in relationships means something entirely different. It means you're willing to respond consciously, regardless of who is right or wrong. It means you do not shrink from involvement, nor do you inflate your ego in self-righteousness. To be responsible in a relationship does not mean to carry the other person's emotions. It does not mean absorbing their anger, their confusion, their insecurity. It means being stable enough within yourself to respond wisely. See this clearly. If someone around you is angry, and you become angry in response, you are not responsible. You are reactive. Reaction is mechanical. Response is conscious. Reaction is burdened. Response is free. Responsibility without burden in action means this: you do what is needed, not what is emotionally impulsive. You act from clarity, not from hurt. You speak from awareness, not from wounded identity. This requires tremendous inner steadiness, because the world will constantly test you. Situations will not unfold according to your comfort. People will misunderstand you. Efforts may not be recognized. Outcomes may not match your intention. If responsibility is tied to recognition, it becomes fragile. If it is tied to outcome, it becomes anxious. But if it is rooted in awareness, it becomes unshakable. Imagine engaging in your work with total commitment, but without tying your self-worth to success. Imagine caring deeply for someone, but without trying to control their journey. Imagine participating fully in life, but without carrying every event as a personal attack or personal victory. How different would your inner experience be? Responsibility without burden is not passivity. It is not withdrawal. It is not emotional numbness. It is actually greater involvement, but without inner turbulence. When you are inwardly stable, responsibility becomes creative. You begin to see possibilities instead of problems, solutions instead of blame, growth instead of failure, and something very subtle happens. People begin to feel safe around you because you are not reacting unpredictably. You are not collapsing under pressure. You are not projecting your fears onto them. You are simply present, alert, responsive. Such a human being becomes a pillar, not because they dominate, but because they are steady, not because they control, but because they are conscious. In every action, there is a choice. You can act to defend your identity, or you can act to serve the situation. The first creates burden, the second creates clarity, and over time, this way of living transforms you, because you no longer experience responsibility as something imposed from outside. It becomes an expression of your inner maturity, a natural outcome of awareness. Notice this in your own life. Where does responsibility feel heavy? Is it where you feel judged? Is it where you fear losing approval? Is it where your identity feels threatened? The heaviness is not in the action. It is in the attachment. The moment you loosen attachment to image, to validation, to perfection, responsibility becomes light. You still act fully, perhaps even more fully than before, but you are not internally entangled. This is a profound shift because it frees enormous energy within you, energy that was previously spent worrying, overthinking, defending, justifying. That energy becomes available for creativity, for compassion, for intelligent action. Responsibility then is no longer about carrying the world. It is about participating in the world consciously. And when participation is conscious, even challenges become opportunities for growth. Even conflict becomes a doorway for deeper understanding. Even failure becomes a teacher, not a burden. Take a moment now and bring to mind a relationship or responsibility that feels intense. Notice the emotions attached to it. Notice the identity involved. Notice the fear or expectation present there. Now imagine approaching that same situation with only one intention: to respond consciously, not to win, not to defend, not to prove, only to respond with clarity. Feel how that changes the experience within you. The tension reduces, the breath steadies, the mind softens. This is responsibility without burden in real life, not as an idea, but as a living practice. And as we move further, we will explore how this understanding can become not just an occasional realization, but a constant way of being, integrated into every breath, every action, every relationship. We have explored responsibility as the ability to respond. We have seen how identity creates weight, how control creates anxiety, how attachment creates tension, and how awareness dissolves burden. Now, the question is not philosophical, it is practical. How do you live this? Not occasionally, not during reflection alone, but in the movement of daily life. Because understanding is simple, living it is the real transformation. The first thing to see clearly is this: responsibility without burden begins with inner stability, not outer arrangement. You may rearrange your schedule, change your job, adjust your relationships, but if the inner foundation is unstable, the burden will simply reappear in a new form. Inner stability comes from awareness of your own mechanics, your thoughts, your emotions, your reactions. When you are unaware, they run unconsciously. An unconscious reaction always feels heavy, but when you become aware of your reaction, something extraordinary happens. There is a small gap, a space between stimulus and response, and in that space, freedom exists. Responsibility without burden lives in that space. When something happens, before you react, notice the impulse. Notice the tightening in the body. Notice the rush of thought. Notice the emotional surge. And instead of immediately acting from it, simply observe. In observation, reaction loses its grip. In awareness, compulsion dissolves, and then you can choose your response consciously. This is the discipline of responsibility, not discipline imposed from outside, Hizmo, but discipline born from clarity. Many people believe freedom means absence of responsibility, but that is immaturity. True freedom is the capacity to take full responsibility without suffering, without resentment, without exhaustion. Because when responsibility is conscious, it energizes you. It does not drain you. Look at moments in your life when you acted with total involvement, not for reward, not for recognition, but simply because it was needed. In those moments, was there burden, or was there intensity and aliveness? Burden appears only when the ego interferes, when it says, "What about me? Will I succeed? Will I be appreciated? What if I fail?" The moment the focus shifts from what is needed to what about me, responsibility becomes heavy. Living responsibility without burden means shifting the center of attention from self-image to situation, from personal drama to present necessity, from insecurity to clarity. This does not make you selfless in a moral sense. It makes you effective in a practical sense, because you are no longer wasting energy defending your identity. You are simply responding to life intelligently. Over time, this transforms your experience completely. Work becomes a field of growth, not stress. Relationships become spaces of conscious exchange, not emotional battles. Challenges become invitations to expand, not threats to survive. Responsibility then becomes empowering. It becomes the very source of your strength, because you realize that you are not at the mercy of circumstances. You are capable of responding to them. This is a profound realization. It shifts you from victimhood to participation, from helplessness to clarity. But remember, this is not achieved in one dramatic moment. It is cultivated slowly, gently, through consistent awareness. Every time you notice a reaction and choose a response, you strengthen this inner capacity. Every time you release unnecessary psychological weight, you become lighter, and gradually, responsibility no longer feels like something imposed by society, by family, by work. It becomes your natural way of being. To be human is to be responsible, not because someone demands it, but because awareness makes it inevitable. When you are fully conscious, you cannot avoid responsibility, but you also cannot suffer from it. Now take a quiet moment and reflect on your life as it is today. The roles you play, the expectations you carry, the duties that await you. Instead of asking, "Why is this so heavy?" ask gently, "Where am I attaching identity to action? Where am I trying to control outcomes? Where can I simply respond without psychological weight?" Let these questions settle within you, not as problems to solve immediately, but as seeds of awareness. Because responsibility without burden is not something you achieve. It is something you allow. It emerges naturally when you stop adding unnecessary layers of fear and identity. And when you live this way, something beautiful unfolds. You move through life with steadiness, with clarity, with strength that does not shout, with involvement that does not exhaust. You become available to life fully, without shrinking from it, without being crushed by it. This is inner engineering in action, not as a concept, but as a lived reality. So as we close this reflection, do not carry these words as another responsibility. Do not turn them into another standard to meet. Simply remain aware. In this moment, breathe gently. Notice the space within you. Notice that awareness itself is effortless. And from this effortless awareness, responsibility flows naturally, lightly, intelligently. Let this understanding settle, not as knowledge, but as experience. And as you step into your life again, carry not the weight of responsibility,